Hello everybody, this is WarriorDan, and today instead of reviewing a individual game as I usually do in these weekly long-form videos, I figured I'd do something fun, and instead we'll be going through my top 10 Pax East 2020 game reveals. PAX has long been viewed as the ultimate one-stop destination for indie developers, mid-tier studios, and AAA giants alike, with everyone being given an equal opportunity to shine and build positive community engagement directly, illustrating a far more transparent and natural symbiotic relationship between consumer and producer, rarely seen elsewhere in the industry. One of the best things to look forward to with each subsequent major PAX event has always been the heralding of new and innovative games, produced by indie developers and smaller game publishers, who fall outside the narrow selection of E3 presenters, and this year is no exception. While a number of noteworthy games were announced, these were the ones that stood out to me the most. Setting aside a few exceptions, the seemingly annual flow of World War II-inspired games usually contend themselves with falling within the first-person shooter genre. However, Partisan's 1941 differentiates itself from the rest by instead opting for a slower, stealth-based gameplay style, set within the real-time strategy genre, with a special focus on other secondary gameplay mechanics, like character customization and base building. The player experiences the game through the perspective of a Red Army squad as they attempt to resist and ultimately repel the German forces. While real-time strategy games normally don't appeal to me, the historical themes and the subtle infusion of XCOM-like stealth gameplay does pique my interest. Also, I think in general as Americans we tend to undervalue how important Russia was in fighting back Germany. If it hadn't been for Russia's defense of Stalingrad and the Germans' idiocy in attacking Russia during winter, which proved to be ultimately to Russia's advantage, World War II could have been a much harder battle to fight for the Allies. So from a history perspective, this game definitely stands out as more interesting than, say, your Call of Duties normally tend to be. The game is currently projected for release sometime this summer. Ember is a silly multiplayer-driven first-person simulation game where you and your friends play as firefighters, with the goal of cleaning up local fires and other electricity-based hazards, as well as optionally saving civilians along the way. Ember is designed from the ground up as a social multiplayer game, although it does support single-player mode for those loners who don't have friends willing to suffer along with you. While the game's visuals don't really stand out as inherently distinct, the game's physics-based gameplay will likely prove to be the centerpiece attracting new players to join in the fun. The game is set to launch as a Steam Early Access title with new modes, maps, and other content and improvements aimed for release over time. With all these factors in mind, one would hardly be surprised to see YouTubers line up like moths to a flame to see who can be the worst possible firefighter of them all. After all, in games like these, it's often more fun to fail than to succeed. I'm not sure why 2019 and 2020 have brought us this new narrative trend of spitting on corporations for prioritizing profits over people, but neither do I object to it, especially when it's used for comedic effect, as is the case with easily the most absurd, but yet also oddly charming title on this list. To quote the game's description directly, failed businesses no longer cease to exist, they sink beneath the earth, and their employees are cursed to wander the halls for eternity as monsters. It's your duty to put these monsters out of their misery and repossess their assets so that your boss can afford a new car or something. The degree of pettiness and unobtrusive, humorful snark presented in the statement alone indicate players who appreciate this exaggerated, absurd-driven humor will feel right at home with the direction Going Under plans to take. Going Under is described as an action-driven dungeon crawler game featuring a female protagonist, which means there now might be a chance a few of the major gaming news sites may decide to do their jobs and cover it, as she wields a variety of office-themed weaponry to fend off against her fellow employees, who have been trapped in place so long that they have turned into monsters, literally. Whether it turns out to be a fun trip filled with cliches, or just turns into a boring or irritating lecture on the joyless life of quiet desperation one can find working in an office, remains to be seen. Do you like Sea of Thieves? Do you like Battle Royale games? Well, guess what? Now you can have both at once. Blazing Sails pits teams of players against one another as each crew faces off on either land or on sea, until only one team remains. Blazing Sails takes a lot of existing concepts from Sea of Thieves, such as the need to repair your ship by hammering planks of wood to cover up holes, the extensive focus on character and ship customization, and to a lesser extent the soft, colorful art style. Where Blazing Sails steers away from Sea of Thieves and instead charts its own course is in regards to its implementation of the Battle Royale gameplay mechanics. Blazing Sails boasts a variety of equipable weapons including pistols, bows, crossbows, shotguns, pickaxes, and even what appears to be the age-appropriate equivalent of a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher. If Blazing Sails can somehow manage to step out of the shadow of its influences and instead find its sea legs on its own, with the help of an active community, maybe, just maybe, its maiden voyage onto the Steam store won't result in a total shipwreck. I just hope that when I and my team of landlubbers find ourselves outmatched in game, we're at least presented with the option to parlay. Eastern Exorcist is a 2D side-scrolling RPG game boasting a richly detailed hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation style, a format that has largely been abandoned in recent years as CGI animation has taken its place as the dominant animation preference, largely due to the incredibly time-consuming and subsequently often expensive nature of hand-drawn 2D animation. As Eastern Exorcist takes the side-scrolling RPG genre into a Eastern direction, it is interesting to see how this world and subsequently the different narrative themes and art direction may help this game stand out as different from the many 2D side-scrolling games already on the Steam store. Not a lot is known about Eastern Exorcist at this time, but if the final game is anywhere near as good as the teaser trailer makes it out to be, then fans of the 2D side-scrolling RPG genre should have a lot to look forward to in the near future. For those that prefer a slower-paced, more melancholy experience driven by exploration, finding hidden secrets, platforming, and engaging in a number of side activities, all in what appears to be a semi-open world environment, Hazel Sky may be the game that calls to you. Players will experience the vivid island from a third-person perspective, engaging in a number of platforming and puzzle-solving activities, taking on the role of a young engineer named Shane, who finds himself tasked with the challenge of proving his mettle by passing a series of trials in order to prove himself worthy of being accepted as an engineer, or else find himself banished from his tribe. And yes, I too see the narrative parallel between this and Horizon Zero Dawn, so don't think that escaped my attention. Hazel Sky weaves together narrative themes of friendship, love, ambition, honor, and duty into a coming-of-age story that, if told right, has the potential to make the game a overnight cult classic, or if it fails, then it's a less interesting version of Horizon Zero Dawn. The dystopian future setting is one that has been explored so often and so deeply in almost every narrative-driven medium that finding a new and innovative way to build upon those foundations can at times feel impossible. Liberated attempts to overcome this initial entry barrier by delivering both the narrative and the gameplay in a uniquely graphic novel style, with the player observing the world through the frame of a comic book panel. Dialogue and sound effects likewise appear as speech bubbles and text-based sound effects. Whenever you dynamically change the perspective or otherwise hinder the player's ability to perceive or interact with objects in the environment through an unusual static camera, you're either going to be met with critical acclaim and fan loyalty, or else become the punching bag for everyone with access to the Steam user review section. Personally, I was never fond of the archaic but beloved Resident Evil static camera perspective, so for the time being, I'll wait until more footage of the game becomes available, but given its clever, simplistic comic book styling, and conversely the overtly grim and foreboding atmosphere and world building, a place of honor in the top 10 list seems more than appropriate for Liberated. On a unrelated note, I stopped the initial recording at this point because my Chinese food takeout had arrived, and as with anything, takeout food trumps any recording process. Nevertheless, onto our third top game. Game Deck is a sci-fi role-playing game where the player takes on the role of a character living in a dystopian future, where corporations control every aspect of society and employ widespread psychological manipulation in order to effectively groom generations of thoughtless drones. Over the course of the campaign, the player can greatly influence the story progression and ultimate outcome through a vast array of in-game player-driven choices. If you are thinking this also serves as the exact description of the Outer Worlds, you wouldn't be wrong. That said, that's where the similarities mostly end. Game Deck is a top-down, cyberpunk-themed isometric RPG, where you take on the role of a private detective, solving crimes and following the trail of mysteries that will have you alternating between virtual worlds and the real world, leaving you to wonder what is reality when virtual reality takes precedence. Game Deck's gameplay style, according to the developers, will be partially inspired by classic tabletop RPGs, where wordplay often has more impact than gunplay. Careful observations and deductions will play a key role in determining success or failure in most instances here. Between the cyberpunk visual color palette, the incorporation of classic tabletop-esque RPG decision-making, and the vast potential for clever social commentary, Game Deck definitely strikes me as the type of game that could leave quite an impression at release, although its deliberately slow pace may be a justifiable cause for dismissal by those who prefer a more action-oriented approach. If you count yourself among that number, fear not, there's always still Cyberpunk 2077. One of the most fundamental decisions that often set indie games apart from their AAA brethren is their own unique artistic direction, and arguably more so than any other title on this list, the Artful Escape lives up to this generalization. The Artful Escape is described on its Steam page as a 2D adventure platformer, and employs a distinct psychedelic art style reminiscent of We Happy Few. But while the Artful Escape borrows some overt visual tones from other games, it stands alone in most other areas. The protagonist is an emerging rock star by the name of Francis Vendetti, who on the night of his first performance gets lost in a vivid world of his own imagination, and embarks on a multi-dimensional, side-scrolling journey. Each one of the worlds in the game really stands apart from the other, and has their own unique identity with different environments, creatures, and challenges facing the player. With music being one of the primary narrative strings tying the different worlds together, let's just hope that this is one soundtrack that proves to be out of this world. When it comes to third-person animal-based flying games, I tend to have quite an eagle eye for spotting them, and it's always a pleasure to dive into these feather-light games and subsequently crow about their quality. Okay, bird puns aside, the Falconer is easily one of, if not the most, visually impressive games on this list, although that's not the only reason it's included. The art style is beautiful, and it's best described as something of a cross between Breath of the Wild and Sea of Thieves. The Falconer is an air-based RPG game where you play as an individual riding a giant falcon, doing mid-air battle against other bird-riding enemies in these entirely fantastical worlds. And if that doesn't already sell you on the game, I don't know what will. The Falconer is actively being developed by an indie developer by the name of Thomas Sawa. It's hard to pronounce. Thomas is best known for his extensive experience in the Elder Scrolls modding community, specifically regarding his well-received Skyrim mod, whose name I can't pronounce, so I'm going to throw it up on screen now. Released back in 2012. The Falconer has already preemptively met with great critical acclaim, having won 2 awards at the 2019 Game Connection Indie Development Awards for Best Hardcore PC/Console Game and Best Hardcore Game. As with many of the games on this list, no release date has yet been set for the Falconer, but with any luck, hopefully players will be met with the opportunity to take to the sky and soar to new heights sooner rather than later. And yes, I said I was done with the bird puns, but sorry, I can't help it. Well, that's my top 10 list for this year. Sadly, due to schedule conflicts, I was not able to attend Pax East this year. Then again, given the dramatic bus-related misadventures I had last year, maybe that's just as well. Hopefully next year I can use my newly acquired press credentials to get into Pax East 2021. At any rate, what were your top picks from Pax East? And in general, what are some of your most anticipated indie games coming out this year? Let me know in the comments down below. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, and subscribe and click the bell icon if you want to see similar videos like this one in the future. This is WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome everybody, and peace out.